Uh, let's see how long it takes for us to start streaming. Uh, Let me respond to this tweet, and by the time I'm done responding, we'll be streaming. Um, I mean small, large ship, not large, large ship. There we are. Right, so now that we are streaming, yeah, all right, Twitch is caught up. It's been a week because of holidays, so this is our first stream in a while. Let me go ahead and tell the world. Streaming game dev. There we go. Boom. All right. So, where were we? We were working on the camera for our diver, and I figure we'll go ahead and keep doing that. So the basic issue with our camera is that it only works okay in specific situations, and the rest of the time it's pretty crap. One of the problems we've got is stuff like it won't actually zoom in properly, but another problem we've got is that it will zoom out too much. So basically, we have to do a bunch of little things to try and make this more acceptable. We can change the head animations and stuff later, but we need to make it so that the actual camera feels decent, right? So one of the things we're going to have to work on is when we are looking to the side, how do we actually want that to appear? In a normal diving game, when you look to the side, the camera floats above your shoulders. And in this game, it goes underneath your head, like this. And the reason for that is fairly simple. This diving game has some compressed space. It has some tight corridors. And I don't want the player to have their camera shoved inside of their backpack. I'd like the player to naturally have a camera that seems to work in tighter conditions. One of the ways to do that is to go into first-person mode whenever you get into a tight spot, but I always felt that didn't really give the right feel. So what I wanted to have happen is that when you're in a tight spot and you're looking around like this, I'd like it to kind of feel like it's properly part of the same, what do you want to call it, regime? I want it to feel like it is, there's no disconnect between the outside spaces and the inside spaces. I want the player to control when the camera needs to get in close. But that does have some limits, and one of the limits is this. We can't let the player camera go through the ground. So what we're going to do today is we're going to implement some physics-based camera stuff to make it so that we don't lose the camera so much. Excuse me. Sorry, I've been eating snack food and drinking Coke because it's Saturday, and I figured why not. So that was not just a burp. It was one of those carbonated burps that really makes your nose burn. Fun. So what we're looking into is adding in two pieces. The first piece we're going to need is a gimbal for our camera gimbal. So a gimbal for our gimbal. Basically what happens is, let's not open all of that. There we are. This is our camera gimbal right here. And the pivot is right here on our character. So if we were to see this, you can see how this ball here represents the character's gimbal. And as we move it, the camera swings around. And that's all correct. And as we zoom in and out and all that jazz, the camera gets put in the right spot. But the gimbal itself is located underneath the chest, underneath the head here. That's so that when we go to the side, we're going to be looking kind of underneath the chin. And when we flip over, we need that to be above. And there are times when it can't be either one. It needs to be something special. So we're going to introduce a slop gimbal, which is something I didn't really want to do. We have two choices on how to introduce a slop gimbal. One is to actually have an object, but the other is what we can do is we can have the camera gimbal have a local position that gets reoriented when necessary. And I think that's probably better for our particular case. I think having a second sloppy gimbal would probably introduce some jitter, so we're not going to do that. We're going to go ahead and do it with numbers. The only downside of Writer, it takes forever to open. Boom. All right, so now that it's open, I lied, it's not open yet. There, now that it's open, what we're going to want to do is put in a last, we're going to have it put in a target position and a starter position. So protected vector 3 starter position, I call it default position. Protected vector 3 target position. We're going to go ahead and put a little note right here. Default position is going to be local position on start or on awake. And this is going to be a local position target to lerp to. And now this is important because these are not going to be the same. They are going to be the same sometimes, but when we flip over, we're going to want to flip where we are. And we're not going to want to just jump to it because it'll be like a snap. It'll feel really weird. I don't think I want the update. I think I want you to go away. It looks like I can never escape from unending updates. Everything will update every day. It's the nature of the beast these days. So if we take a look at what we're doing here in update. Okay, so first we got to set the value. Here in awake, we're going to go ahead and say default position equals transform.local position. Down here in update, we're going to want to lerp towards the local position. Or maybe not lerp towards, maybe we're going to want to move towards. So if transform.local position does not equal target position, then we're going to want to move towards it. First, we've got to set the target position. There we are. Then we're going to say, come on, transform local position. Southern Cross says fun detected. Well, this is the wrong place if you're looking for fun. All we're doing is programming a camera. So it's going to be a lot of vector math. Transform.local position equals vector3.lerp. Oh, no, sorry, move to. We'll start at transform.local position. We'll move towards the target position, and we'll go by time.delta time. I don't know, times 3. That's a magic number. We'll probably replace it later. But for now, that's all we're going to need. When we flip over, we're going to want to make it so that our target position flips. So here we are. Inverted equals not inverted. We're going to go ahead and say if inverted, then target position equals new vector 3 original position. What do I call it? Default position. Default position.x, default position.y, and default position.z. This is going to be a negative. Else target position equals default position. There we go. And that should make it so that when we move our camera, when we flip over, our camera should slide rather than jumping. And it should be beneath our chin in both positions. Oh, local position might be incorrect there. We'll have to figure it out. I might have to adjust it. But here you can see it's correct, and then when we flip, it didn't move correctly. So my guess is that our local Y is not what I think it is. So let's take a look. Here's our camera gimbal. If we switch over into debug view, we'll get the locals. Here's our local position, and this is our local Y. And as you can see, the local Y should be correct. But our character is not where we think the character is. The character is actually way up here. The player's 0 is not where you think it might be. And that means that the camera gimbal is not in the right spot. I think what we might want to do is add in like a secondary chin position or something. I don't know what the best way to do this is. Maybe we'll go ahead and just make it a vector that we can set. So public vector 3, we'll go ahead and call this a public vector 3 default position. Tooltip, automatic on play. And then here we're going to have a public vector 3 inverted position. And what we're going to want to do is make that equal to vector 3 dot forward for now, vector 3 dot 0. And what we're going to want to do is actually draw a line to that in our gizmo. So I don't believe we have a gizmo draw. No. So we're going to create one. Public void on draw gizmos. Well, that didn't work, did it? We're going to want to draw where our opposing edge is, where that vector is. So to do that, we're going to have to set our gizmo. Excuse me, I'm a little bit burpy. We're going to have to set our gizmo's transform matrix. There it is. I believe that we want to set it to our transform dot. It wouldn't be ours, would it? It would be our parents. Yeah. Transform dot parent dot matrix 4x4. I don't remember whether it's local to world or world to local. I think it's local to world. We can always switch it if it's not right. And then at the end, we want to switch it back. There we go. And in here, we're just going to draw a little circle where the camera's position is going to be. Alan stopped in to say, hello, hello, we're doing camera stuff. So gizmos.draw circle, draw wire sphere. There it is. And we're going to want to draw it at, so this is going to be, that's too much stuff, center. So it's going to be at our inverted position. And we're going to go ahead and give it like a very, very small radius. We don't need much of a radius here. The only problem is we don't actually have a color set, so we're going to go ahead and set that. Gizmos.color equals color.yellow, I think. How about magenta? There we are. And let's just go ahead and see whether or not that sticks. So we're looking for a magenta color, but it might be inside of something at the moment. So let's go ahead and move our camera gimbal around a little bit. That's not it. I think that's something else. It does seem to be the right color. But if we were to take the normal here, if we were to take the inverted position and move it, oh, I guess that is it. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and set that to, I don't know, here-ish. That seems about right. And then what we'll do is, instead of doing the multiply by -z, we're going to just go ahead and do the inverted position. And we can actually do this much easier. We can say target position equals inverted position, default position. Save a little bit of space. All right, so just do a little bit of zooming until it recompiles. I think it might be recompiled. So when I come down here and I flip, yeah, so you can see how it snaps to above. That's what we want. Now, it moves too fast, and there's a couple of other small issues with it, but it's the same. The basic idea is correct, and the reason it moves too fast is because we made it move as fast as we wanted it to. We're going to go ahead and put in an extra little float here, public float slosh speed equals 1. Go down here, we'll take out that magic variable we put in, and make it the slosh speed. There we go. The last thing we're going to want to do, by last thing, I mean the first actual thing, is we're going to want to make the camera a physical object that doesn't go through crap. This is a challenge, and everybody who's made a camera knows it's a challenge, to the point where I think 90% of games with cameras that are going to be fidgety are normally done with some kind of third-party camera system, just because it's such a pain in the ass. Notice that the bubbles are shooting out the top of our head because I've got the bubbles set up wrong. That's okay, we'll fix them later. The basic idea is correct, but we're moving through junk. We don't want to be able to do this. So we're going to want to raycast from the camera gimbal's center out towards the camera. And if it interferes with anything, we're going to want to move the camera. There are two basic lines of thoughts about this. One is you can raycast from where the camera was to where the camera is going. If you do that, then you won't pass through any objects, but you can still get stuck behind objects. I can show you that. So if we were going to be basing this on where the camera is moving, it would be very easy for us to, for example, let this giant rock get between the player and the camera. See? Can't see it. I think this giant rock doesn't actually have a collider, so neither approach would actually work on this particular giant rock, but you get the idea. Whereas if we raycast from the center of the camera out, what we can do is we can simply reel the camera in until it is in the spot where we can see ourselves. I guess our first order of business might be to just go ahead and add some colliders to that rock so that we can use it for testing purposes. I'm not sure why. It should have colliders. I don't remember not putting colliders on this rock. It does have a collider. We may have accidentally deleted the colliders off of our player character when we switched them. That's probably what happened. So the diver animations has some colliders in it, if I'm not mistaken. It should have some. I don't happen to see them, but my guess is that we just accidentally did not add them into our new diver. So we're going to want to do that. But first, let's do the camera stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a line from our camera position, from our gimbal position out to our camera, and we're going to change the zoom if it turns out that that's not working out for us. So we'll do that down here. After we set the local position. There we go. So down here we're going to create a public void check camera collisions. I still not used to it helping me this much. There we are. So when we check the camera positions, it's quite easy. We're going to create a ray equals new ray. Transform dot position and then towards our camera. So do we store our camera? I think we do. Camera, yeah, we store it. Camera dot transform. No, that's not how you spell camera. Camera dot transform. Ha! My fingers aren't working anymore. Dot position minus transform dot position. That's going to be our ray, and then we're going to raycast it. Yeah, and then we say if physics dot raycast, and then we pass it out the ray, and then we pass it out the hit value. But there's roughly 1 million different options, and unfortunately this pop-up is concealing all of our options, so we can't friggin' see what the options are. But what we can do is we can just say the distance, so it'd be camera.transform.position minus transform.position.magnitude. The only issue with this is that it may end up hitting a player widget. Like we put a collider in the center of the player's chest, and the camera widget is actually in front of the player. It's under their chin. So if the camera is behind the player, it's going to hit their chest widget. We got two options. We can either move, we can either put a mask on it so that the player is not going to be caught, or we can move the ray a meter through the player. RC Fox says it's hard to type when people are watching. Yeah, well, for me it's always hard to type. I'm not a very good typist when I've got a mic in front of my face, because the peripheral vision is all impossible. You can't make out how your fingers are moving. I don't stare at my fingers when I type, but they're in my peripheral. You know, I can see them kind of moving, and that gives me a good sense of where they are. Can't do that when you're like this. Either way, I think a better choice for us in this case is to mask them. So if we take a look at the player, you can see that this is on the layer beings, and everything within the player, including the camera, is going to be on the layer beings. So if we mask out beings, then we don't have to worry about colliding with the player itself. So in order for us to do that, we're going to need to do a layer helper. I don't remember what the keyword is. Layer to name, name to layer. Get mask. So here's get mask, and the get mask takes a string array of layer names. But I want the opposite. I want like an inverted layer mask. I guess we can just use default. Let's go ahead and just take a look here. What layer are these on? Default. Well, let's just go ahead and use the layer mask of default, which is probably 1. So if we were to pass it a layer mask, here you can see we can just say int layer mask. Boom, there we go. That should be all well and good, and it shouldn't ever hit the player because the player is on a different level. It will also not hit anything that's not on the default layer, which might include things like, I don't know, octopuses and stuff. So we'll have to figure out how we want that to be. I can always add more. Oh, this isn't going to work, is it? It needs to be an array, doesn't it? That's going to barf. Let's see if it barfs. Maybe they've made it a little bit better. Oh, well, it's not barfing. I have a feeling it hasn't compiled because I remember it barfing pretty aggressively. Let's try it. You need to name the layer if you pass beings and receive the number of it. Well, I know what the beings is the only one I want to actually ignore, but the layer mask is, I believe, the layers that we want to include. It's not. I don't think it's mask out. I think it's mask in. So if we hit something, then we just zoom in and until we're no longer hitting things. We got a couple of options for how to zoom, but the most basic option is to use the exact same zoom commands that we're using here, cam zoom. So if we do that, we can simply say cam zoom, and then we can multiply it by some value like 0.95f, and we'll just see whether or not it works. That should reel it in, and we'll see if that actually happens or not. I don't know why raycast hit is underlined in yellow, presumably because it's never used. Yeah, it's obviously something that we might use later. There's no reason to get rid of it at the moment. Let's go ahead and see whether or not that works. It definitely won't collide with the player because the player is masked. It doesn't have any colliders at the moment. Yep, seems to be working. We can't zoom through the terrain anymore. That's a good sign. So if we were to flip over again, I can try it out on this handy dandy rock over here. I can then just not layer with the... I didn't realize you could just do that with an integer value. So here you can see the camera is not really zooming in at all. It does zoom in, but it has some weird flaws that I'm not 100% on. My guess is that we're inside the rock. Yeah, that's what it is. Because the player doesn't actually have any colliders at the moment. We can go through the rock like this, so it won't actually trigger. But as soon as the camera widget is outside the rock, it triggers fine. We can't pass through the rock by zooming out. So that'll do. We're going to want to add colliders back into the player. And Mifaz has a suggestion of doing it using an unmask, which we can probably try out as well. So here's the thing that is not great. When you get real close to the player like this, you can't see anything because the player is in the way. What I'd like to do when this happens is pan off to the side so that the player will automatically, you'll be able to see around them automatically. And then when you move to the left, I want you to pop over the left-hand side. Not necessarily pop, but I want you to slide over to the left-hand side. So rather than being directly behind the head, I want you to pan from one side of the head to the other. So what I actually want is, right now, I've got 2 points attached to the player camera rig. I've got... I don't know why it's floated up there. So the actual camera gimbal is here. I don't know why it's... Oh, there it is. So we got this point, which is a starting point. And then we got this purple point up here, which is the point where it goes when it inverts. What we actually need is a ring. We want a circle around the player's head. So in order to do that, we're going to... Mifa says I should make obstacles transparent in that case. So I don't want the obstacles to be transparent because I want the player to feel claustrophobic. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making it so that the camera... I mean, I'll make the obstacles transparent if I have to, but I want that to be like a last resort thing because I want the player... The diving experience has to include that claustrophobic feeling of being stuck in a cave, without the burden of actually being stuck in a cave. But now our next step, I think, is going to be to draw a ring around the player's head, and where we're going to actually put our gimbal on that ring is going to depend on how close we are to the player and whether or not we're inverted, what direction we're looking. So let's replace all of this with a different approach. We're going to have a vector 3, delete this, center of gimbal, local position, gimbal, center for circling. Public, float, and this can be gone. Oh, I just deleted the target, didn't I? We actually want the target to be the target. My bad. Ah, too much. This is going to be gimbal center. Now, another way to do this would be to have a secondary... So I'm thinking about it. I'm not sure I want to do this with math because there are 2 ways to do it. But if I don't do it with math, we may get jumping pieces. So there are 2 ways to do it. One is to do it with math, and the other one is to do it with a hinge. Like I can create an object that is offset. Let's go ahead and do it with the 2-object approach. We'll try it with the 2-object approach, and if that doesn't work, then we will we'll do some math. Obviously, we're going to have to fix this up a little bit. It's a little bit gronky at the moment. So we're going to have to specify upwards, ahead, and we're also going to need to have a circle pivot. So with that in mind, we're just going to go ahead and delete these, I guess. They're not important enough to worry about. I can recreate them in like a minute and a half if I have to. But down here in the OnDraw Gizmos, we're going to want to draw some lines. So what we're going to do is, instead of drawing a sphere, we're going to draw a line from our core out to the gimbal core, out to the circle pivot. We'll just call it the pivot. And then we're going to want to draw a line out to the camera. Should be easy enough. There we are. That should help us to get the pivot working. But of course, we don't have a pivot. I should barf. Should give us some fat errors here. See? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a pivot. We'll just go ahead and do that right here. We'll call this pivot. Pivot. And we'll mark that as a pivot. Just a boom. And this pivot is going to actually contain all of the other objects. So just drop all of that stuff inside the pivot. There we are. And then the camera gimbal itself is going to be moved up into the head like this. And then the pivot can be moved out back to where it was. Now the only issue here is that the line is, it's on a perfect plane. And that's actually not what we want. We want this pivot to, so we want the pivot to be rotated, but we don't want the camera gimbal to be rotated. So we're going to actually clear the rotation out of the camera gimbal. And there's also no reason for it to be scaled. That's just going to cause us issues later. But the pivot itself is going to be in the correct spot. Come on. Yep, there we are. Something like that, yeah. And so what we're going to do is we're going to rotate the core gimbal around the axis of the player swimming. And that will swing the entire thing around the head of the player as needed. But the actual camera is on this strut here. And that camera is going to be... all of our camera maneuvering is going to be on the pivot rather than on the core camera gimbal. So that shouldn't be too hard. Let's try it. Down in here where we've got all of these, you can see transform.rotate, transform.rotate. These are all going to be pivot.rotate instead. Just take a look and see whether or not we've got any transforms that are floating around here that we haven't seen here. There is one, just pivot.position. No, that one's correct. All right, so we're going to just see whether or not our camera still works. We've lost the ability for it to pivot when we flip over, but we're going to fix that up and have it be nice and fun. So one of the issues here is that we have changed the zoom because we've scaled things. So the zoom is now multiplied by 4. We're going to need to just adjust that a little bit. So here is the zoom, horizontal zoom. And you can see that it goes out to 20 here, and it goes down to, what is this? 4. I'm going to bring this down to 1. That might be a little low, we'll find out. And then this will bring it down to 5. I'll try 7. That's more like it. 1 is actually a little high, so we'll go ahead and lower that down even further. There we go. Easy as pie. And now what we're going to want is to have this center object swing so that it is always going to be... This is actually a little bit tough. So the camera is looking in a specific direction. It's always looking through the player. Or, you know, across the player. But it's always going to be looking down or up or left or right. If it's close, we need to swing in the direction that the camera is resting. So basically what we need to do is take the direction between the the camera gimbal core piece and the camera. And if that direction is substantially to the right or to the left, we need to swing the camera to the right or to the left. This is a challenge because I need to think of the math that can do it. But one of the things we're going to do is just delete the slosh speed value because it's no longer going to be any use. So once we've pivoted, what we're going to want here is, once we pivot, we need to move our core camera. We actually need to do this first, don't we? Yeah. No? Maybe. So the issue here is when I move the camera pivot, I don't want to actually change the angle of the pivot. I want to move the pivot without rotating the pivot. So we're going to have to store and then resurrect our pivot angle. So we need to actually do this before we pivot. We'll do it before we do anything. There we are. The pivot's angle will be adjusted to repair any damage the gimbal did. Is gimbal not a word? I thought that gimbal was a word. Is it gimbally? No, it's gimbal. It's just this. How do I tell it that this is correct? Add to user dictionary. This computer. Thank you. So once we've got it figured out, basically the further off to the side we are. Wait, we already know how far we are off to the side. It's the horizontal value, CAMX. Here it is. So we can simply take CAMX. No, wait, we can't because it's based on the zoom, isn't it? You see, if we're zoomed in, we need to be moved off to the side more. But I don't think there's any reason to not be moved off to the side ever. So if we're zoomed in to the right, we should always be on the right. And otherwise, we should always be on the left. Let's, because it's actually, isn't it just 90 degrees off? Woo, this is fun, right? Hearing me talk about stuff like this. So basically, there are a couple of things we have to think about. When we are looking down like this, can I have control? Thank you. When we're looking down like this, we want it to be offset so that if we're looking to the left at all, we want to be on the right-hand side of the head. But as we look more and more to the left, we want to pan down underneath the head. So basically, what we want to have is it to be 90 degrees off from wherever we're looking. So that isn't as hard as it sounds. We just have to keep in mind that it's going to be mirrored to be the other 90 degrees on the other side. Let's go ahead and try it. So angle equals, if we take a look, we've already got the float horizontal float, we call it pivot adjust, and that's going to be our CAMX value. CAMX is between -1 and 1, and so what we can do is if it's below 0 we can go one way, and if it's above 0 we can go the other way. So that shouldn't be too hard. We'll go ahead and use CAMX straight for that. So the pivot adjust is going to be 90 degrees plus whatever our actual camera angle is. And that's going to be based on this horizontal angle value. So and then here we're going to add 90 or subtract 90. cam x is less than 0, then negative 90, otherwise 90. I think that's it. Might be backwards. And then all we need to do is set our transform dot rotation equals quaternion.identity. I think we need to reset it and then move it. But we can do that by just saying quaternion dot rotation angle axis. And then here what we're given is a couple of values. Transform.rotation is global. We can do it with local rotation if we'd prefer. I think that might be better. Let's try it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do vector3.up, and it's going to be pivot adjust. And we're just going to see whether or not that works. Oh, it looks like it's working. I'm not getting a snap. Let's go ahead and see how it looks in this view. So this purple line is what we're actually doing. And you can see that the pivot adjust is not at all off to the side. It is straight down. So that kind of implies that this didn't work. No, I don't think it's moving at all. I don't see it changing. It's definitely not moving. Okay, so the pivot is not changing its position at all. But this is rotating. Oh, it's just the y-axis is the wrong axis. Try that again on the correct axis. I knew I was seeing some movement. I just couldn't tell what the heck was going on. That's more like it. So you can see that there is a pop as we move from side to side. We're going to clean that up, but you can also see that we are currently exactly backwards. So let's see if we can just oh, that's pretty good. All right, so that's not too shabby. When we flip over, you can see that we are doing the weird chunking, blunging thing that's not really what we want. And that's simply because the thing isn't built yet to let us do it like that. So we're going to want to do a couple of things. The first is this is going to actually be a lerp. We'll just do it at time to delta time. There's no hurry. That will allow us to not snap, which will be good. The other thing is this is not going to be correct. This pivot adjust needs to be altered if we are upside down. The question is it going to be 180 minus that? I think it is. Exciting camera stuff. Now, if you're doing something like this, I recommend you just go buy a camera solution. I just couldn't find any that actually did what I needed them to do, so yeah, that's more or less correct. We are a little bit over the top. You can see how we have zoomed in So close that our face got cut off by the camera's near action plane here. One of our solutions to that is to reduce the camera's local plane so that we can still see our nose. But the other problem here is that it's not offset by exactly the right amount. You can see how it's a little bit too far offset. Maybe not. Maybe it's exactly right because the camera... Is that exactly 90? I don't think it is. I think that that is not even close. I think that's like 75. Yeah, it looks like it's going to be stuck at around 75 degrees, which really shouldn't be what's going on. So my thought here is that we probably inverting it isn't working right. So my guess is that it's not 180 minus this at all. It's something else. So if we look at it here, for example, and we look like this, and we pause it, you can see how that's precisely 90 degrees. When we do the other way, it's not. So I'm probably just going to need to do it. It might be 180 plus, but I think that the answer here is I've got to do it 2 different ways based on whether or not it is upside down. If we look down here at the X position, we actually just add 180. So maybe that's all I have to do, add 180. Let's not get stuck in a fog effect. Oh, that works fine. So that does work. The pop across our shoulders is a little bit much, but you can see how that feels pretty nice in terms of how I want it to feel. What we're going to do, I think, is that pop is just a little bit too aggressive. The options here are we can either lerp or we can have special rules for when you are directly behind someone's head. Should we just lerp slower? Let's try lerping slower and seeing whether or not that is going to be acceptable. Because that's definitely the easier solution. Otherwise, we've got to create 2 different mathematical equations, one for when you're nearby and one for when you're not. So that's more acceptable in terms of how it pops. And then when we look, okay, that's not too bad. It doesn't feel bad at all. It's still pretty peppy. I like it. Yeah, that's not bad. So there's still some stuff I don't particularly agree with happening, but it's not too shabby. I think one of the issues I've got is that we're turning over way too soon. We're turning over precisely at 1. I think we actually want to turn over at closer to 1.1. So down here you can see that I say, camera greater than blah, blah, blah. I'm going to just change these to 1.1. And we're going to go ahead and make these 1.1 as well. I'm not convinced that that's the right option, but we'll try it and we'll see whether or not it feels any better, because maybe I just need to adjust the horizontal angle so that it goes above 90. Oh, there's like a sticking now. That's not bad, but it's not what I want. So here's the horizontal angle, and you can see that over here it goes up to 90. I'm going to just go ahead and change that to 100. And we want this to be linear. That's close enough. So now we zoom. Oh, that's not bad. And then it really pops out. See that? That's not bad at all. I like that. So I think we need to change it back to 1. I think we just undo a bunch. Undo. Do. There we are. I'll let that compile. And you can see there's a snap there. See that snap? That snap is because we're not at precisely 90. We're at 100. So it's to get a 20-degree snap when we switch sides. And the reason for that is simply because our two, we use the same curve for both. So I think what I need is an inverted version of this as well. And basically what we'll do is we will use whichever one we actually want to use. So here it is. If inverted, then we just use the inverted horizontal angle. So the question is whether or not... Did I do the wrong one? I did the wrong one. There we are. And the question is whether or not we want to invert it or not. I think we're going to go ahead and leave it with the plus 180 because that will make it easy for me personally to do the math. I don't have to try and figure out whether or not I need to be at like 130 or something. I can just do it down to 80. So this, edit, 80. And once again, we're going to want to try to get it flat. And that should keep it from snapping. Let's find out. Oh, except for now, of course, we're not using the correct angle. That's fine. That's fine. It's definitely a lot less snapping, but we're getting a little bit of disconnect on the element we created here. So if we're going to do it like this, if we're inverted, then we want to use inverted horizontal angle.evaluate CamX plus 180. Otherwise, that. There we go. Easy enough. So if we come back out here, let's see if our snapping is gone now. Pretty much. There's still a little bit of snap. All right, so let's go ahead and change a couple of things. One of the things I'm going to want to change is the camera's clipping plane. It's got a really, really distant clipping plane. But obviously when we're zoomed way in, there is a chance for the camera to literally just fall through the head. We might have to deal with that later. You can see how the head actually snaps. See that? It also changes whether or not the cloud effect is visible. That was weird. Look at that. The lighting on the terrain camera is so fucked up. Oh no, I see that. That's my light. That's my headlamp. All right, so because the headlamp is tied to the head, when it snaps, it moves to a new position. The head snapping like this is obviously something we're going to want to fix. The reason that it's doing that is because we're telling it where to look. But I think there's no, I'm not sure why it's doing that. It doesn't matter. It's fine. That's fine for now. We'll fix it up a bit later, a bit better later on. For now, the basic setup is pretty solid. We've got a camera that doesn't suck nearly as bad as it did 10 minutes ago, or an hour and a half ago. And that's going to be a lot of what we want. We're going to want to put in some colliders for our character, because right now with our lack of colliders, we can pretty much do anything we want, and that's not exactly what we want. We would like to have some collisions happening at some point. So to add in colliders is no difficult task. They're just default colliders. We don't need to worry about them too much. We'll go ahead and just add one in right here. Alan Wyvern says he likes my attention to detail. There are a fair number of details, but I'm not sure which one he's talking about. So this capsule here is just going to be a collider. We're going to name it Collider. We obviously don't need it to render. But what we need is for this capsule to actually show up. Oh, you can see how big it is. It's much too big. That doesn't seem right. Why is it that? Oh, because the bone is so small. Okay. Brilliant. All right, so we're going to go ahead and just reduce everything way, way down. Wow, this is huge. There we are. So with our capsule collider attached to our chest, we should now bounce off of some things. We're also going to want to attach some colliders to our feet. We can do that some other time though, because I need to make it so that they puff. I need to make it so that when they hit the ground, they produce dust, and I'm not quite ready to do that yet. We're also going to add a collider to our head, just so that we don't headbutt through things. But I want to make sure that this is correct before I do that. Alan says, just in general. All right, so you can see that our chest collider works, but our head can cut through some objects. Oh no, oh God! So we're going to want to put another collider in our head. To do that, we just find our big old head bone. Here it is. Add in a nice circle. Circles. And bring that down to the correct size. I'm not sure why these are so big. They shouldn't be that big. There we are. Once again, we're not going to need to have the mesh renderer or the mesh filter. Oh, you know why it is? It's because I'm importing from an FBX now, and the FBX has a different scaling factor. Oh, that's why nothing worked. All right, well, that's fine. We can adjust it. So just bring that in so that it's roughly head-shaped. Maybe adjust it a tiny bit here. And now we can no longer headbutt through things. But look at the layers. The layers are on default. That's interesting. I would have thought that if you added something to... You know what? The body may not be... Yeah, it's hitting the body. This new body might not be on the right layer. Let's go ahead and take a look here. Yeah. So we're going to want to change this to beings so that our camera doesn't collide with it. Some of our camera weirdness might have been that. Headbutt ready. Clonk. Yeah, so we're definitely no longer passing through this. We're actually automatically moving up because we're using a rigid body setup, and the rigid body is telling us that we're hitting a glancing blow, and therefore we're pushing up. This should have a circular collider attached. Yeah, so you can see. Perfect. And we're getting some slowdown right now. We have a problem. One of our things is causing us some slowdown. I'm not actually sure what it is, though, because it's just listed as particles, and the particles didn't cause us any slowdown before. Just in the past week, after updating to the newest version of Unity, have the particles started to give me issues. And it's all the wait for sync thing. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically particles get fired at a specific moment after a frame draw when you try and create new particles. And if you try and create new particles and it can't actually finish them, it skips an entire frame. And all you get is this giant... Oh, here, I can show you. So if we pop up our analysis profiler, and we hit play. So here you can see that it is running at some specific speeds, right? You see those spikes, those awful, awful spikes? These green spikes that are going way, way higher than 15 meters a second. These are like down to 5 or 4 meters a second. You might be wondering what those are. Well, they are mostly waiting on graphics. See? Wait for present. So this giant chunk here is not anything I am doing. It is a particle system malfunctioning, and it wasn't doing it until recently. And you can see here, same thing. Wait for present. So it's got 85 milliseconds for every 100 milliseconds of gameplay. Is wait for present, and that's entirely the particle systems malfunctioning. They changed something in version 17 here, and it is giving me some grief. I'm not actually creating very many particles. All of my particles are pre-created, and you can see now that I've paused it and unpaused it, it's doing it fine again. But at some point, it's going to start to barf again, and I don't know why that is. The only particles I'm creating are the bubbles coming out of my head. All of these things like the fish and the seaweed and all that stuff, that's all, well, I guess this is creating particles, this little puff here. But everything else is just using particles that spawn in right at the beginning, and then they just stay spawned in forever. But that effect right there is creating new particles, but it's not very many. So I'm not sure why it would cause us so much slowdown. We'll have to think about what's going on there. Maybe I'll just disable it for now. I can always see whether or not that's causing the slowdown by simply getting rid of it. Only problem is it's basically invisible. Just hide it. And then sand puff as well. I'm getting slow down here in the view as well. That might be because I've got like a million things showing. But I don't know why that would be. It's not usually a problem. No, I'm not. I don't know. I honestly have no clue. But that is an issue we're going to have to address at some point. If Unity remains that way, I'm going to have to optimize away whatever it is. That's going to be fun. For now, our character is functional again. We, I think, disabled all of the ARM-IK, so we're going to have to re-enable the ARM-IK. There's also no more foot puffs and stuff like that. We're going to have to re-enable those as well. But the basic idea is now sound. We've got our sprinting working. We've got our glowing fish. We'll have to redo those. The fish are a little bit basic at the moment. They have a problem with their animations, but that's going to take like 2 hours. I don't feel like doing it right now, so we'll come back to it later. Oh, see that? That was fun. What that was an opacity error, because there's actually a fog card right in here. And the fog card shader has a depth cue. So what happens is as we move through the fog card shader, the camera glitches out for 1 frame when it's halfway across the fog card. And it doesn't draw any of the transparencies. See that? So that fog card is interfering with the... Oh, I can't move backwards. I'll have to fix that. But the fog card is interfering with our ability to see the transparencies. See the fog card? And that's because apparently the camera has an issue with the fog card only being half visible. I'm not sure why that is. It shouldn't be an issue, but it is. So strange. Maybe it's our near clip plane being smaller that's the issue. Well, that's easy enough to check. Just grab that camera bring that clip plane back up to 0.3 again. And you might be wondering, why would it be the clip plane? Well, it may be that the numbers I put into the fog card don't get along. Oh, that's still all errored out. So it's just something about, oh, you know what it is? The clip plane isn't affecting it at all. Yeah, this is independent of the clip frame, a clip plane. My guess is that our fog card has an error in it, but I don't know what that error would be. So here's the fog card shader, and you can see that it doesn't really have any values that would be adjustable to fix that. So if there is a problem like that, it is at the heart of the fog card shader, which wouldn't surprise me. I made it in an afternoon while I was still learning shaders, so who knows. But those kinds of things are really distracting. We're going to want to make it so those don't happen. And one of the ways we can make it so those don't happen is the fog cards can actually just shut themselves off when you get too close. You can see it happening here too, same problem. Basically, when the fog card goes transparent, it's not actually going, I mean, it is going transparent, but the problem is that that transparency doesn't register as transparent when you think it would. There's some issues with when it is actually considered transparent. And that's a really complicated space. There's a lot of things there that I don't really understand. But we might be able to fix this problem just by having the fog shaders go transparent faster. And once they're transparent, they can shut off. We'll deal with that later, though. I don't want to fuss with that today. So I'll turn lighting back on and just see. We should have the same effect with the lighting on as with the lighting off. Yeah, see? Very strange. All right. Well, that was fun. If you have any questions, now's a good time to ask them because I'm kind of just floating at the moment. That was all I wanted to do today. Now that the holidays are over, we'll probably get back onto schedule and start working again. I think next time I'll probably start working with fish. Our fish shader needs some love and care. And unfortunately for us, that fish shader is very complex because it has to integrate things like the fish ability to turn left and turn right. When fish decide they're going to panic and go away, they get gone real fast. And so our fish shader has to really understand how to do that. Previously, what I've been doing is actually turning the fish, like giving it a nice full body twist. But I'm not actually sure that's necessary. I mean, if it is necessary, it's only necessary for like 3 frames because the fish turn and jet away faster than I had, imagined. When I actually went and looked at it, when you startle a fish, they're gone. So it makes a lot less sense to have. Well, here, I'll show you. By which I mean I will refresh my memory and show myself. So these purple glowing things are our current fish shader. The purple glow shows their turnness. It'll turn red or blue if they are planning to turn due to human interference or due to pathing of any sort. So you can see how they turned red to make that turn. And as I approach, they'll start to panic and turn away from me. I have to get pretty close for it to happen, though. See him? See him trying to turn away? You can see how they aren't actually turning in the correct direction, and they don't move very fast. So basically, everything about it is wrong. They're turning the wrong direction. They're not moving fast enough. It's all crap. And that's because there are 2 moving pieces. There is the shader, and then there is also the particle effect. And the particle controller that's doing the particle effect is bad right now. It's just wrong. So we need to fix it so that they work in tandem instead of being wrong. And I think see how this time they're right. These ones aren't going in the wrong direction. They're turning correctly. but they're obviously not actually turning. They're stuck in their normal operation. Well, we'll deal with that next time. We'll come up with a better flocking maneuver for them running away. All right, so thanks for sticking around, everybody. After a week of not talking at all, my voice is already dead. So I will see you on Wednesday if you want to stop by again. Ciao.